Welcome to this week 8 edition of the Waiver Wire video. I am your host, Evan Riggs, joined as always by my co-host, Dalton Willie. Surprisingly electric game that we're at halftime of right now, and the Bears Patriots. Our guy Khalil Herbert gets in the end zone when he gets his chance, as always. Mr. Zappy has taken the place of Mac Jones. That's all the rage right now. Perhaps
I
he could
remember
be
being laughed at on a certain podcast for bringing up Bailey Zappi in the preseason, and look where we're at.
You know, it's funny. He's still so unknown to me. I almost called him Brian Zappy, but I just went with Zappy because I couldn't remember for sure. But, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, Zappy probably out there, probably worth it on waiver wires. But today we've got the usual. We've got the top 5, your standard 12-team leagues, 1 QB leagues. First, before we get into the main 5, I thought I'd give a few honorable mentions. Deontay Foreman, he is just slightly too high of a roster percentage by a couple percent, but he would be either 1 or 2 on our list, I believe, Dalton, if he were eligible. And Chuba Hubbard, I know he got banged up, and I know both these guys are not going to continue to be relevant, but he's at least worth a roster, and he's still too low of a roster percentage right now, but he didn't quite crack the top 5 for us.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of going after either the Panthers backs. I feel like there's a little fool's gold going on with that team after their win over the Buccaneers. They might not be as good as we thought they were. I will say it's 2 years straight. I'll be chiming in for Deontay Foreman just to start. He looks like the better back yesterday as well. He had longer runs, and he just has that breakaway speed.
Mm-hmm. And then the last guy, JaMycal Hasty, obviously the news of the day before Zappy took over the world tonight was James Robinson being traded after the unfortunate injury to Breece Hall on Sunday. James Robinson, now a Jet. Travis Etienne has that backfield seemingly to himself, mostly. We'll talk about that more on the podcast this week. For the purposes of this show, JaMycal Hasty not going to crack the top 5, but is at least a deep add because most backfields, the backup should probably be rostered in your league. So JaMycal Hasty, at least on the radar. But we can jump to the actual top 5, the real list now. And what better place to start than the guy with 3 touchdowns on Sunday, Dalton? That's Mecole Hardman. I think if Mecole Hardman had about any other name, he would already be above 23% rostered, which is what he is at right now. He's at 3 straight games of double digits. I'd have to look, but I would guess his 26 fantasy points this last week is a career best, even though he has had some long plays throughout his career. He's been getting involved the last couple of weeks, and this was obviously the biggest one. This was the first time all season that we've seen the jet sweep game from the Chiefs and from Hardman. You and I kind of speculated, well, maybe he's been dealing with the heel injury for the last month or so. I think he hurt it against the Chargers in week 2. He barely played in weeks 3 and 4 and barely contributed in weeks 3 and 4, more to the point. But it takes a certain kind of fantasy team to be able to target him. I think he's going into his bye. And so basically you need to be a team that you can stash him now, but maybe your bye weeks line up next week to where you need to play him. Because I still think the next guy on our list is the superior stash, but Hardman can be a start in a pinch. He's proved enough the last couple of weeks to at least merit that. He's wide receiver 31 right now.
Yeah, and look out, Debo, because this is the first wide receiver with 2 rushing touchdowns and a receiving touchdown. So
yeah,
the times are changing. But, I mean, his involvement hasn't just been gadgety on this team. Against the Colts, he was like 2 inches away from a deep touchdown on the first drive. So it's definitely there for his performance to get better. He's definitely the 3rd wide receiver in 3 wide sets. And like we were talking about earlier, I think Sky Moore is making some mistakes that kind of give Mecole a better chance to really solidify himself. And even with MVS kind of taking away some of the deeper stuff, Mecole operating on those slant routes and those short ones, he's one of those guys that can just take it any time, any day. And being invested in the Chiefs offense is something you definitely want in fantasy when you can get it for free. It's really easy to do.
Yep, it's going to be up and down, but the ups will be worth it if it happens to be in your lineup. And again, just as an emergency start at some point, you can do worse than a guy with big play potential in this offense. And then number 4, this is a repeat from last week. Still worth mentioning because he didn't get picked up as much as I thought. frankly. And I know that's because we don't know when Jameson Williams will be back yet. All we have now is confirmation that he will play this season, which I didn't realize that was in question. But we at least have that. I don't know if there's really anything else to add on him that we didn't already say last week, which is he was the first receiver or second receiver off the board in what has turned out to be a very good receiver draft. At least it looks like it so far. And that was with a torn ACL. So this guy is an elite prospect, and this offense could all of a sudden kind of use that jolt of energy that he could bring them when he does eventually come back.
Yeah, well, the thing with Jameson Williams that we didn't have the opportunity to discuss last week is it's official that DJ Chark went to IR after missing 2 games. So there's probably a timeline where Williams is back before Chark.
He's got a family. He's relocated. I'm starting to add personal details to this.
Saving the full drop for the podcast on Wednesday. You better believe that's getting one more play.
Thankfully, Chark got $12 million because he has a family. But
I do think he's going to have to relocate with that family next year because, yes, as you said, it is Jameson Williams' time.
Yeah, and this offense desperately needs a field stretcher. And I don't know. I mean, Amon St. Brown, they said his concussion wasn't a big deal, but if he steps into this and Almiron's out as well, there's huge target viability in this offense for him.
Mm-hmm. And I actually believe now. I never know what to believe when it comes to concussions anymore with these teams in the NFL. But I believe Dan Campbell said he didn't actually have a concussion. He just got put in the protocol, which not unheard of. That's what happened to Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs a couple years ago. No concussion, but an injury to the head or neck gets put in the protocol. So sounds like he will be back at least this week. And then number 3, again, another repeat, but shocking to see his roster percentage low enough to be on here again. That's Wendell Robinson. Another productive day this time for him, but it comes at a 70% snap share. The week before, it was a ease him back into it, and he scored a touchdown, and that made the day look good. This time, he gets 8 targets. He goes 6 for 50. It's what we said last week. I mean, this team is decimated at receiver. The promising rookie tight end Bellinger is now out for a decent amount of time, if not close to the whole season, with a pretty gruesome sounding eye injury, like a fracture somewhere near his socket because he got poked in the eye, which hopefully he gets well soon. Robinson, like we said last week, just the perfect fit in this offense for the misdirection stuff they are apparently now just amazing at. And they need weapons besides Saquon Barkley to help out all-pro quarterback Daniel Jones.
Well, and I mean, this Brian Daboll, this regime drafted him, and he seems to be the guy they want in that offense, and it just works in their short yardage situation. I'm not going to say Daniel Jones is elite, but the guy is getting the job done, and you want an offense that moves the ball up and down the field. And right now in the NFL, it's kind of a rarity. I mean, even the Bucs are looking bad. The Giants team can do it, and Waddell's the guy getting a lot of that work in the short to intermediate game.
If you're in a PPR league, I think this is a very safe, high floor PPR option going forward. So a little confused why he is still on waivers after last week, but go scoop him up if you got the chance. And then Dalton, number 2, Isaiah Pacheco. We got a painful lesson in Andy Reid existing again for fantasy managers last week. It wasn't what we hoped when he got announced as the starter, but we're still telling people go at Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, and I think even before the starter news, if you were a savvy manager, you should have rostered Pacheco. This Chiefs offense just looks like a running back by committee, and it's not looking great for CEH, who just keeps getting away with these touchdowns he's scoring, and that's about it for him right now. Pacheco is it looks like a very good runner. He's really fighting for the tackles. I think the most important thing here is if one of these guys, McKinnon, Pacheco, or CH, go down, this turns into a 2-headed monster on a team that their rushing efficiency is there. They just need somebody to take over this backfield. Mm-hmm. And I mean, post-buy rookies for running back is a huge fantasy gold mine. We know about that. And if we come out of the buy and Pacheco is taking over this position as the first and second down back, I think there's a lot of profit to be there.
Yep. And although we didn't quite get the takeover that we had hoped for when the Chiefs making him the starter was enough to get a tweet and I think even a story from one of the main NFL reporters, either Schefter or Rappaport. I don't remember which one of them did the story, but he did play a season high 30% of the snaps. He had 8 carries, which again, not a ton, more than CEH still though,
And more snaps.
And more snaps. And he was the guy who was getting, it was only a 2-possession game that, before the Juju touchdown in the fourth quarter. So those are important snaps for a running back, a guy that they were putting trust in him, having him be kind of the guy who gets those closeout carries. And he did well. Not that, it was blocked great for him. So like CEH probably could have done something fairly similar. But the fact they trusted Pacheco in that situation, they play him a season high in snaps after they say he's the starter. You clearly see they want to keep getting him more involved. Andy Reid said during the last week that we didn't get him. He didn't get his turn like he should have against Buffalo, basically. And then they came back and made sure he at least got that. And it really could have been a lot better. He had the massive kick return that 2 or 3 plays later ends up in a CEH rushing touchdown, probably mostly because Pacheco was out of the game because he had a 60-yard kick return and was catching his breath and they scored so quickly after that. So I think the most important thing, I love the rookie bye week point that you made. I think that is very, very relevant. And as a Chiefs fan, and I know you agree with me, CEH right now is the third guy I went out there in this backfield, and McKinnon's not going to be the main guy. Maybe in the playoffs if these other 2 guys don't pan out, but McKinnon is going to be the pass blocker and occasional playmaker to save his legs for later on in the season. Pacheco, I think, has a chance to really emerge in this offense. And if he can even be the 50% to the 30 and 20, that's going to be a massive role. CEH will eventually stop scoring touchdowns when he only gets 6 or 7 touches.
Yeah, I think it is time you sell CEH if you can get a return for him at this point. Even a guy like Michael Carter is somebody I'd probably be willing to give up for CEH or to trade CEH for. I think it's doom and gloom for him.
Yep.
He's just making the wrong decisions every week in a lot of important situations, and they're getting covered up by his touchdowns, which any running back in this offense is going to get touchdowns.
Yep. Completely agree with you there. And then number 1, the ad of the week. This is the Gus Edwards week on the waiver wire. Was again, I'm surprised at the guys who are under 40% and like well under 40. I think Edwards is in the 20s as well. Sure, we had no idea really how involved he was going to be in his first week back, but we knew he was inching closer to being back. Maybe we should have mentioned him more prevalently last week than just as a name, but he's out there and you should go get him. I think the bigger question is how much you could spend or you should spend on him at this point. But Dalton, what's your read on this situation right now?
First of all, Gus Edwards' career yards per carry is 5.2, only surpassed by Nick Chubb, and 43% of his rushes have gone for a first down or a touchdown. He is clearly what this Ravens offense was missing, which is just somebody to move the chains. Last week, he was mentioned as kind of an outside looking in guy. You have J.K. Dobbins missing 6 weeks at a maximum, it looks like. And with the way the Ravens have been with him, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets eased back in and this looks like his rookie season again, where him and Gus are really splitting things down the middle. I think it's a very, very easy ad. He even got 2 targets in this game, which you usually don't expect. And for the next 3 to 4 weeks, I think he's like a RB2 with RB1 upside on touchdown potential, especially because I think Kenyon Drake sucks.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think that's why his box score looks the way it did. Yes, they eased him back into it by playing him 36% of the snaps, but they basically said, you are touching the ball every play you are in there. 16 carries on just 36% of the snaps is pretty crazy. That will not continue to happen, but I have faith that he will keep getting worked in more and keep playing more snaps, and those touches will stay about the same. He obviously cashed in 2 touchdowns. The yards per carry was about what you'd expect from him typically. So it was a very solid game in his first game back. for those of us who have always been J.K. Dobbins stans, the fact that he got 16 carries, which was more than Dobbins has ever received from the Ravens, was a little bit sad. But Gus Edwards was not having to play with another 1A or 1B back in this game like Dobbins usually is. And then there was less easing him back in than there's been with Dobbins all year. But the point still stands that everything you said is right. Kenyon Drake is terrible. Justice Hill almost cost this team the game by fumbling late in the game. So he may get some carries, but this is Gus Edwards' backfield until Dobbins is back. There is just no question about that. And like I said, I think the biggest question is how much do you bid? Because for as great as he could be the next month or 6 weeks, there is a possible expiration date if Dobbins is back and effective later in the season. And not a doctor, and also haven't seen official reports, but internet speculation is that this was probably a scar tissue being cleaned up thing for Dobbins, which is more maintenance than like a major concern for him once he's coming back. Like there's a chance he could come back and he may still be eased back in, but there's a chance he could come back and be fairly involved right away if that's really what it was. So I think it's just an interesting kind of conundrum here with Gus, because if you have Breece Hall and he is now being dropped off your team, if you're in a redraft league this week, you just need somebody to be a stopgap, and then you just figure it out later. And Gus Edwards can be your guy. And is he worth blowing all of your fab or almost all of your fab for that?
Ride Gus the bus to your fantasy playoffs, because the Ravens aren't going to ride J.K. Dobbins till they're in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. That's how we're doing it, baby. It's Gus the bus season. We're here for it. We're ready for it.
I would give this like a 70 to 75% of your fab. Yeah. So not quite as high as Kenneth Walker, where it's a slam dunk, which, by the way, just incredible. Kenneth Walker is very good.
I have him on 48% of my underdog teams. That's really good for me.
Not too shabby. This is not a Kenneth Walker situation where it's his job rest of season, but he is going to be very, very much involved for the next month, and he will still be involved after that. So I think you don't use all your fab, but you use most of your fab if you need a running back. And there is a manager in every league who is reeling from the Breece Hall injury. And unless you have James Robinson, there is no easy solution on your bench, most likely.
None.
All right, Dalton, I think that is going to do it for this waiver wire video. We will let you guys, if you have watched live or if you're watching this later, we will let ourselves get back to watching this absolutely electric Bears and Patriots game. The Zappy show is on. The Herbert show is on. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're watching this tomorrow as well, we appreciate you equally as much. We will talk to you guys on Wednesday with the main podcast this week.